took the first 3 points of my talk and said them really, really well, so maybe I'll just tell you a bunch of stories. It's a pleasure to bring you greetings from my home, which is central Pennsylvania, Harrisburg. Has anybody been through central Pennsylvania? I mean, not just driving through, but have you ever stopped? Have you stopped in Harrisburg? Some of, well, okay. So, it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. I live in a small capital city outside of it. I never thought that I would say, growing up, that I would be from central Pennsylvania, because I was born in Berkeley, California, and then my dad joined the Navy and we saw the world. So I spent 11 years overseas before I was 17. But now I'm apparently from Pennsylvania. I was driving along the Susquehanna River a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago now, and all 3 of my kids were in the car, and I was reflecting on this, and I asked the kids, I said, do you guys feel like you're from Pennsylvania? And there was an awkward pause, and then one of the kids said, well, yeah. And then I said, but I mean, do you feel like this is where you're from? Another awkward pause, and another, yeah. And then I said, but do you feel like Pennsylvania is your home? And my daughter, Zoe, pointed across the river to a big building, which was Harrisburg Hospital, where she was born. She said, Dad, see that building? I was born in that hospital. This is my home. So apparently I've raised Pennsylvanians. But you are New Englanders. And you New Englanders, for those of us who live farther south, have a reputation, you know. Hardy, reserved, tied to the land, able to handle the cold weather. When I heard a friend of mine in Vermont say that, you know, when the snow begins to stack, we just pack it and then drive on top of the snow. And I said, yeah, in your Subarus, because everybody in Vermont apparently has a Subaru. So I'm from central Pennsylvania, and about 20 years ago now, I found myself doing something that I never dreamed that I would do, and that's lead a classical Christian school. I went to the University of South Carolina, where I studied history and classics. I knew something about some Latin and Greek language and history, but I didn't know anything about classical education. But there I found myself in Harrisburg, and someone came to our church one summer and said, we're starting across the river a classical Christian school. And a board's been working to start and found this school, and if you'd be interested in enrolling your kids, we have an information night, and you can interview with some of the board members. And she mentioned, and we're teaching Latin to children beginning as early as 3rd grade. And then she had me. What? I've always thought that I would like to teach some Latin or Greek to my kids when they grew up, and I thought I might do it on my own. I wasn't sure where they'd be educated. I thought maybe we'd do some homeschooling, but I thought I love these languages. And so when I heard that Latin was going to be present at the school, I was intrigued, and I said, I'm going to go learn more. Well, the short end of this story is that in about 2 weeks, they had hired me to be their new head of school. And we opened the school in the fall of 1997 with 22 students in grades K through 5. I had no idea what I was doing. We just were learning as we were going along. I remember starting to read. I remember calling people who had done this for a year or more beyond us. There was a school in Lancaster called, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called Veritas Academy. They had started in 1996. So they were veterans. So I would go visit my friend Ty Fisher, the head of school there, and ask him to tell me all the mistakes he had made the previous year, write them down, and try to avoid those myself the next year. School began to grow. So I didn't really find classical Christian education. It found me. And so all of us, to one degree or another, you have your story, I have mine. We're on a journey of one kind or another. Certainly that journey involves the education of our own children. And if there is anything that tugs at our hearts and minds greater, I don't know what it would be. In fact, think about all that's invested when it comes to educating your own children. It can get people kind of upset and concerned. or really, really happy, or really, really sad, because it involves your child, your faith, and your money. So it can be freighted and intense. So for me, it was about 10 years of riding a tiger. I was a head of school from 97 to 2007. When I think about the past, I think about how the board took a chance on me to even hire me. What business did they have hiring me? Well, there weren't many choices back then. And in a sense, I was taking a chance on this too. I didn't understand that well what it really was. I liked what I heard. I understood it at kind of a first level, that we were going to educate children according to a tradition that was well-trod and proven, that we were going to teach some of these great arts that have always been influential in forming human beings to be capacitated and effective, like grammar and logic and rhetoric, and reading some of the great books. I had an appreciation for that, but it was somewhat of a formal appreciation, not a kind of deep experience with these things that I wish I had had. But I wanted to know more, and I did wish that I had had more at that time too. So I realized that I was going to begin to get an education along with my own kids. I was going to have to, in a sense, get the kind of education that I had missed, even as I was trying to help give it to children in our school. Does that sound familiar? It's all of our experience, because virtually all of us did not receive a robust liberal arts education ourselves. And so we don't have even a clear understanding of what it is, and yet we're attracted to it. We know there's more to it. There's some depth there that we don't fully get, but we want it, and we want to give it to our kids. Can you see how this might result in some mistakes? Some misjudgments, some missteps, some misunderstandings? Well, I've experienced all of those. I remember just wondering what the liberal arts were and being able to name them. We're talking about this with the staff team today. You've heard of a liberal arts education, right? But can you name the liberal arts? We can't even name them. And if you're like me, 20 years ago, if you tried to name them, you would misname them. Because I would have said, history. No, that's not one of the liberal arts. Well, certainly then, English literature. No, that's not one of the liberal arts either. Well, how about philosophy? I studied philosophy at a liberal arts college. At least I took 101. No, that's not one of the liberal arts. But I went to a liberal arts college. Some of you were liberal arts majors, but you can't tell me what the liberal arts are. Well, you're just like me. Do you see how this results in misunderstandings? They're trying to recover something that we don't fully understand. And that's hard to do. It's hard to admit that we have master's degrees and so forth, and we can't even describe what a liberal arts education is. That's hard. I went through that. Still kind of going through that. So there were seven liberal arts. They were grouped into the verbal arts and the mathematical arts. Now you've heard of these before, but conjuring them up is another issue. And by the way, I don't mean to insult all of you. I know there's some of you who can stand up right now and recite all seven of the liberal arts. Would you raise your hand, please? No, seriously. No, so, okay, grammar, logic, and rhetoric were the verbal arts. Mastering of language, mastery of tongue. Did you study grammar? Okay, well maybe you did study some of it. Did you take Latin? And did you learn French or Spanish and actually learn the grammar? Do you know what a participle is? Do you know what a gerund is? Do you know what a prepositional phrase is? Do you know what a compound objective noun is? Okay, wait a minute. Maybe you heard some of those things before. Why would you study grammar? What about logic? Did you study logic? Most of us did not have to study logic. Could you define logic? I was the same with, what about rhetoric? What is rhetoric? Well, grammar is the study of how words work together to form meaning. How letters form words, and words form sentences, and sentences form ideas. So that you can read and understand with brevity and accuracy, profundity and clarity, and write and speak the same way. And to learn grammar of one language is really to learn the grammar of all languages, because all language has similar grammatical characteristics. Logic is the study of our own mind and how reason works. And there's two branches of it, informal and formal logic. It's the science of correct thinking and reasoning, and therefore, by extension, the science of incorrect thinking and reasoning. The fallacies, the logical fallacies. Our culture is filled with bad thinking and reasoning and fallacious thinking and reasoning, but we don't have the vocabulary to even identify a fallacy when we hear one. Nor do our journalists. And fallacies of thinking and writing and speaking are occurring on the left, center, and right all the time, and we're not even able to defend ourselves against it. Not even those who should be the defenders are journalists. Because they haven't studied logic. They haven't studied how the mind works. They don't know what a good argument is. Do you know what a categorical syllogism is? Do you know what deductive reasoning is? Do you know what soundness of argument is and validity is? These are just principles. Do you know what the law of non-contradiction is? Of course, if you haven't studied, you do know these things, you just don't know the terms for them. The reason you know them is because you use reason. Because you're made in the image of God, you're a human being. But the reason you can't describe the use of your own reason is because you haven't studied the use of your own reason, and that's the study of logic. Rhetoric is the study of persuasive speaking. That you can win an argument. Have you ever noticed this? You won the argument, but didn't change anybody's mind. You won the argument, but lost the person. Because we're not merely logical machines. We don't change our minds just because we hear an airtight argument. There's other things that persuade us beyond just logic. It's part of being made in the image of God. There's an aesthetic side to us. There's other things about who we are as human beings that motivate us beyond just logic. That's why if you watch the right movie, your thinking may change. And it's not because of the argumentation. It's because of the aesthetics and the music and the story. And human beings began to realize that we can't just study logic, we need to study rhetoric. Now, rhetoric has a bad rap. It means manipulation mainly today. But rhetoric meant observing all the available means of persuasion. When are these arts not relevant in this cultural world? And we're only getting started with the first three. The arts of mastering the tongue, mastering speech, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. When is it not helpful to be able to understand when an argument has gone awry and when one is sound and valid? When is it not helpful, even practical, to be able to speak beautifully, compellingly, and imaginatively, not just cogently? Well, all the time it's relevant. Am I not right? So these arts are perennial arts that are human arts that are refreshing and humanizing and cause human flourishing in any century, in any setting, at any time. In fact, these arts will help us to use the technological tools that we're developing wisely and well. I'm using an iPad. This is the modern version of the horn book or the wax tablet. The arts will help us to use whatever technology comes our way well. Those were the three arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. There were four additional arts, the arts of mathematics, learnable objects. Mathematica meant learnable objects, things that you could see and touch and empirically study, as well as things that were learnable that were immaterial, like numbers. Have you ever come across the number 3? I found a 3 today, Mommy. Really? I found a 3.5. No, but 3s are real. 3 is real, even though it's a symbol that we write on a paper of something that is immaterial, unchangeable, invisible, and eternal. That's mathematics. But mathematics also helps us to understand shapes, that's geometry, and those shapes in motion, that's astronomy, and numbers in motion, which is music. And by studying the mathematical arts of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, as well as grammar, logic, and rhetoric, we are able to study all of creation, all of the world, as it were, seeing with both eyes, stereoscopically. And incidentally, it's only human beings who use these arts. Only human beings do algebra. Only human beings write poems. Only human beings use words and numbers. So this is one way that we fulfill our being made in the image of God. Learning to do what only human beings can do. We see Adam and Eve doing this in the garden, do we not? They are called to name the animals. And even to name the animals is going to require some counting. That particular creature has 4 legs and what appears to be a tree trunk coming out of his head. I think I'll call him an elephant. Chesterton says the elephant looks like he ought not to exist, but he does. And so even to name the animals, we see both language and number and mathematics being deployed at the same time. And now my iPad is just shut down, and I have to enter the secret code. But it worked, because I've been trained in mathematics. And memory, I have remembered my number, which was 111111. So I can remember those early days, trying to learn this stuff. I remember encountering this question: why are these 7 liberal arts called liberal? Anybody know why? And why are they called arts and not sciences? Or just disciplines or subjects? Why do we call them arts? I didn't have the answer to that question. And I'm not going to tell you. And if you want to know, you're going to have to come up and ask me. But isn't that interesting? That we have these words, but we don't know really what they refer to, what they used to mean, what they should mean now. So if you feel a little bit ignorant, welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. We are the generation that's trying to reconnect to this tradition, resuscitate it, renew it, and deploy it and give it to our children. We're like a bridge building generation, therefore, trying to give to our kids what we didn't get. It's hard. We've lost this form of education over about 2 or 3 generations. It started to change around 1900 with the rise of progressive education. And what's been lost in 2 or 3 generations is going to take 2 or 3 generations to recover and renew. Are you willing to be that generation that makes the connection back? Someone has to be that generation, the generation that stands in the gap. Will it be you? Will you be willing to do this, even when you realize there's so much that you don't know and you feel so ill-equipped to some degree? That's what's happening all over the country right now. Hundreds of schools like Samuel Fuller have started, and thousands of homeschooling communities have started to do this very thing. Parents, families around the country in large numbers are finally starting to say, not with my child, to the carnival ride that public education has become for so many. With few exceptions, for so many. Not my child. And then when we ask ourselves, well then what will we do? Where do we turn? And you hear about Samuel Fuller down the road, and you hear that it's classical. And you think, well, I have no idea what that means, but Aaliyah seems like a nice person, and I love the teachers, and you take that first step in, and you start moving into this, and you find that you're actually in a current or a river that you didn't expect to be in. And that there are thousands and thousands of other families doing the same thing all around the country, and that you're a part of something that's large and wide that's happening everywhere. And I want to report to you about that, to encourage you. Because you're in New England where it's the ground's a little, there's not much topsoil up here. A little harder to do what you're doing here than say down south. But you're doing it, and you're not alone. So let me tell you, when we started Covenant Christian Academy in Harrisburg, we went through the same phases that you're going through. Now, you can learn from all of our mistakes. I'll tell them to you. Well, not all of them, but I'll tell you most of them. So, our first graduating class, after moving these small classes through the high school, 6 students, and our parents, not everyone wanted to be a pioneer, but these families said, we'll be with you. These kids joined together and said, we'll do this. They became this tight-knit group. And they were the leading edge, they were the pioneers, but the parents were all watching. And there was a group of people behind that senior class, like, what's going to happen? And there were parents saying, I don't know, should I put my kid in this school? I don't know, are they going to get into a good college? Are they going to get into college at all? What's going on? This is 20 years ago. Well, when they finally took we knew this. We would study the other schools that were older than us, like the one that was 1 year older. We would hear that the kids were doing fine on the standardized test. I was told by others, look, the classical curriculum, if you do it even imperfectly, it will do its work. Because it's a study of language and mathematics. And guess what's on the SAT? Language and mathematics. And mathematics only goes up to algebra. Okay, we do those things, And so, we took the first PSAT and SAT, the scores were going to come back, and what am I going to say to these parents about this? Well, the bottom line is the news was really good, and I can tell you that the news is going to be really good on this score for you too. In fact, it's one of the easiest things to do. Because the curriculum does do its work. So those first kids came back, and 2 of them were National Merit finalists. One was a recommended scholar. And in the entire East Shore of Harrisburg, where there were 2 massive public high schools, there were only 2 other National Merit finalists. And we were able to say we claimed half of the National Merit finalists in our school with 6 graduates. And we never repeated those percentages ever again. But we had to give some credit to the parents who had done a remarkable stuff. It's not that hard to do well on the standardized test. It's not. All over the country, students in these schools are performing far above the national average for public school graduates and above independent school scores as well. It's essentially, classical Christian students are at the very top in terms of the average of these kinds of scores and tests. You don't have to worry about that. But it's an imperfect measure of what you're trying to do anyway. And if you would think that that means success, you would be wrong. Because we're not just about information and SAT scores, we're about, in the classical Christian renewal, formation. The formation of humanity and Christian character. Yes, these arts are equipping students to be able to do just about anything they put their hands to. This was the education that was given, by the way, to the elite aristocratic classes over the centuries, because they had the freedom to get it. They had the financial freedom and freedom of time to be able to give this kind of education to their students. Throughout the Middle Ages and before, you had to just go right into a vocation when you're in your teen years and become a blacksmith or a wheelwright or a stonemason. Not that those things are in any way not noble. They're noble. Great, be a stonemason. Great, be a plumber. Wonderful, be an electrician or a coder. But someone with a liberal education can do virtually anything and bring all kinds of creative thought and integrated thinking to any discipline, from being a professor or a plumber or a senator or an electrician. It doesn't matter. This is an education that gives you freedom to be the fullest version of yourself. Now you're getting a sense of why the liberal arts are called liberal. They're liberating arts. They're called arts. I told you I wasn't going to tell you, I'm telling you. They're called arts because they make you into something. Because art is an artifact, art is something made. And they're called arts because they enable you to become a maker yourself. To become a liberal artist. To be able to weave things together with words and numbers. And having accessed and read some of the greatest books, the best that's been thought and said, to enable you to bring the archive of wisdom from reading those great books to any profession, to any calling, whether it's in your home, domestically, or professionally, across the entire spectrum of vocations. So you look at people like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs, who are tech leaders, right? Do you know what Steve Jobs' favorite course was in college? Anybody know? Calligraphy. And Apple is known for its beauty and elegance. He said, Jobs said, that Apple is the intersection of the liberal arts and technology. The people who are doing tech and just coding can sit in a cubicle and design a website and create various programs. But the people who are leading tech companies, more often than not, have been liberally educated. Yes, they have technical expertise, but they can think across platforms and applications. They are not limited to just one particular routine. There are so many engineers who graduate with an engineering degree, they make some good money, but they don't do meaningful work often. They find themselves spending 20 years designing circuit boards for a cell phone. And the great engineers are the ones who can think and write and communicate. I remember meeting an engineer who led 100 engineers, and he said, in my group, I am by far not the best engineer, but I am the best communicator. So the liberal arts liberate us, and they're designed not to supplant technical training and vocational training. They're designed to undergird and complement it. If you were to go to college in the mid-1800s, you wouldn't choose a major. If you got into Harvard in the 1850s, you studied what every student there studied. It was a common curriculum. It was a liberal arts curriculum. Your professional and vocational training would happen on the side or afterward. Dale Carnegie was once asked why he hired so many classically trained graduates to work for him in his oil business. And he said, because they sell more oil. A liberal education is going to benefit you in ways you can't even imagine. Who knows? The statistics are saying right now that in the next 10 to 20 years, we don't even know what 50% of the jobs are even going to be. So a versatile education that's liberally prepared you is the best education you can have for a changing economy with changing work options and needs. I'm thankful that I've been a part of this. I'm thankful to see what's happened in my own kids' lives, even though what they've got was very imperfect, and they're by no means pristine and successful in every sense of the word. But I've seen it bless them and benefit them in ways that give me gratitude. I've also I experienced a great deal of gratitude because of the community and the friendship that I enjoy being a part of this renewal. And I think that will be true of you as well. If you join together in this and you see it through, some of the people in this room will be some of your deep, long life friends. Because there's something that happens when you come together for the cause of our children and their welfare. There's nothing that creates love and charity and humility more than caring for children. It also presents some temptations. We can become the mama bear and the helicopter parent and all of that. But there's also something wonderfully charitable and unifying about working together to serve the community of our children. So I'm going to just give you a couple of definitions, make some comments about what's happening around the country, and try to move to a close. What is this thing that we're calling classical education? People hear this word and they keep, and I'm sure this is the case of you. So tell me again, Elias, what is this classical? How is it different from, why do we even use the word classical? Well, do you remember the Pepsi Challenge? Some of you are my age, or about my age. Remember the Pepsi Challenge? Some of you youngsters don't know what I'm talking about. Pepsi in the 80s came out with this campaign to challenge Coke, and it was very effective. You see, they had come up with a formula that was better tasting than Coke. And they had tested it with lots of tests, blindfold tests. 3 out of 4 people were choosing Pepsi over Coke. And then they went to bash the brains of Coke by starting this Pepsi Challenge. Take it, and you'll see that you'll like Pepsi. So the Pepsi Challenge came out, and Coke replicated the experiment and found out that Pepsi was right. So they got into their labs and they had to come up with a formula that would compete with Pepsi. Do you remember what that formula was? What did they call it? The new Coke came out. And then all of the Coke fans, remember Coke was the dominant, and still is the dominant soft drink brand. The Coke customer base revolted. They were revolted, and they revolted. They loved their Coke. They did not want. They didn't want to switch to Pepsi. They knew. They started to hoard Coke. They started to write protest songs. They started to march around the headquarters. And now Coke had another problem. Their base was revolting, and so they went back to the labs. They had their discussions, and guess what they did? They brought back the old Coke, and they called it Classical Coke, Coke Classic. So why do we call that Coke Classical Coke? Because something new had come along. And so when we refer back to the thing that preceded it, we call it classical. So what we called classical education before 1900 was simply called education. Everybody knew what it meant. It was education in the liberal arts. It was reading the great books. It wasn't opposed to vocational training, but it was considered to be the foundation, the fundament that everyone needed to be liberated, to be a maker, to be creative. And so the aristocracy always got this kind of education. The rulers of Western civilization always got this kind of education. If you had a dream of being a senator, a dream of being a professor, a dream of being a CEO, you would have to have this kind of education. And of course you move through it, and your wealthy parents would move you through, so you would get this kind of education, have the network, etc. Well, if this is the best education for the few, this is simple logic. Does it not follow that it's the best education for the many? Might it be the best education for your son and daughter? Would you want them to be liberated to have these opportunities? Many of us have said, I'd like to give my son or daughter this opportunity. And I'd like to start wherever I can. And it's not just that we're focused on, like, becoming the ruling class. That's not at all what it is. It's to flourish as human beings wherever we may be called. That's what we want, flourishing in any particular calling. And that's what's starting to happen very imperfectly around the country. Do you know how many classical Christian schools there are now in the country? There are about 500. And there are probably 5,000 classical homeschooling communities. They're growing very rapidly. There's probably 10 times as many classically homeschooled kids as classically schooled kids. And now colleges around the country are lining up because they have seen now, over 20 or 30 years, a trickle, a small stream, but it's a widening stream of graduates coming from these schools and homeschools going off to college and being the superlative students. I've heard this from the philosophy professors at Messiah College, where my son studies philosophy and where my wife teaches literature. So we know this college pretty well. 2 of my kids will graduate from Messiah. So the philosophy professors tell this story of kids in the freshman philosophy 101 class. These are kids, no one studies philosophy in high school. Did you? No. So the philosophy professors know if anybody's going to become a philosophy major, you got to win them over while they're in college during that freshman 101 class. First experience that these kids have ever had with philosophy. And then these kids start saying things like, well, but excuse me, Professor, Aristotle says that all knowledge begins in wonder. And the professor says, never before has a freshman quoted Aristotle to me. Where did you go to school? And they begin to realize, oh, there's some kids being educated differently. And they start identifying the schools, and they start going to this happened about 15 years ago. Now, I can give you the names of 20 colleges, including Gordon College, that know this demographic and are actively seeking to recruit students to their schools with honors programs, etc. You can do a classical studies minor at Grove City College. There are classical studies majors for teachers now at Eastern University, New St. Andrews College, Hillsdale is starting one, Wheaton is talking. There's all kinds of things happening because of the students who have been formed by this kind of education. They're their own advertisement. And it'll be no different for your kids. And some of you are thinking, yeah, well, when my kid graduates, he's going to get a scholarship, he's going to be competitive. What about the kids from Middleboro High? Is it Middleboro, Marlboro, what is it? That's not going to be your concern. These kids are getting scholarships, significant scholarships, well beyond the per capita you would expect, because they are much better students. And it's not because they have better brains than the kids over at the Marlboro High, Middleboro High. It's just because this curriculum, it does its work. It's a curriculum and associated pedagogy that's been developed over centuries. And it doesn't change. It never goes out of date. These arts are human. They're perennial. Wherever there is a human being, these arts will help a human being to flourish and adapt to whatever the changing circumstances are, certainly technologically, but even politically. Isn't this interesting to you? Aren't you getting interested to be a part of something like this that is growing wider and deeper? We're the bridge building generation. Before I conclude, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my kiddos. Because what's happened is, in the early years, we became so focused on recovering the curriculum and bringing truth back to our curriculum that absorbed a lot of our attention. But what happened in the process is that many of the schools took our eye off of something else that was even more important in the curriculum. Guess what that is?
Beauty.
Beauty. And what might be the other word that we would, along with truth and beauty, we might say? Goodness. You're exactly right. We're so focused on truth that goodness and beauty, this almost divine triad of the transcendental ideals for human flourishing. Plato talked about them, the church ratified them, you see them in Scripture. We took our eye off the ball. If the schools aren't good, meaning full of kindness and love and warmth, it doesn't matter what kind of curriculum you have. You know, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, if you could speak in the tongues of Latin and Greek and French, Spanish, and have not love, it will profit you nothing. Love is preeminent. And so if our schools aren't full of Christian love and kindness and warmth, generosity, everything we do will fail. Lewis says somewhere that if we teach logic without love, we'll just create more clever devils. So love has to be preeminent. So some of us began to repent and say, you know what, we've gotten proud. We've gotten proud about our SAT scores, proud about how smart our kids are, doggone it, as much as we are given to this school, our kids better be smarter than those kids from Marlboro High. Middleboro High. Because we get too identified, we give too much of ourselves to this, and it becomes proud. It's wrong. And it undercuts everything we're trying to do. So some of us had to start repenting and saying, we have to love people here. It doesn't matter. The curriculum, it creates a culture. Love creates a culture in which the curriculum is planted like a rich topsoil, and then it can grow. Then the curriculum will grow, but it grows in the culture of the school. Does that make sense to you? And then beauty. Our schools are drab. It's because we've all inherited drab schools. We've been educated in rectangular rooms with fluorescent lights, with casement windows that don't open, and we're moved like cattle from room to room by buzzers. And we carry 30-pound backpacks. And we wonder, why don't our 7th graders love learning anymore? Because they're being treated like cattle. And there's no beauty and goodness, and the relationship between teachers and students is not paramount. The relationship between a teacher and a student is critical. It needs to be one of warmth and love. You're not a hired tech. You're not a technician when you're a teacher. You're a mentor. And when your children have a Christian, mature mentor leading your students, you will be happy as a parent, regardless of whether they're learning Latin or logic or rhetoric or reading some great book. If there's a great relationship, you will be happy. So that's what's happened. And when I think about my kids, they've experienced that. When my daughter turned 16, guess who she invited to her 16th birthday party? 3 or 4 friends, classmates, and 3 teachers. Because she had babysat for these teachers. She had grown to love the teachers. She wanted those teachers at her 16th birthday party. We see that kind of thing happen over and over again. So, my kids, my daughter, and please don't take this as boasting, because they all have problems like any human beings do. But I'll just tell you the story of Zoe. Zoe got a bad, imperfect, classical Christian education with her dad being the headmaster. Started in 1st grade, she went to 12th grade, she graduated with 3 other boys. And I would have been happy if she married into any one of those families. 3 wonderful guys. They're still friends, and they're all doing remarkable things. One is a medical doctor, one is a PhD physical therapist, one is a web designer, and Zoe is a counselor and wife and mother. Zoe studied literature at Grove City College. She was the only graduate, to my knowledge, who volunteered to do 2 honors theses in English. She did too, because she wanted to. She got to Grove City and she found herself writing papers that she said, Dad, feels very much like high school. It's kind of like my high school papers. But the girls on her hall were all drowning, and she became a writing tutor on her hall. She had learned to write. It was just felt like grade 13, is kind of how she put it. One day she had finished a test, a history test, an ancient history test, and she sent me an email. She said, Dad, thanks for giving me a classical education. I used my 3rd grade history song to answer several of the questions I had on my history exam, which had to recall Roman emperors and dates and so forth. And I saw this happen at a Christmas concert at our school about 6 or 7 years ago, and the whole community comes together, 400 or 500 people, alumni as well as current, everybody comes. And it's a great concert. We have a great music director and program, sing these great Christmas songs. And after it was all over, there was this little huddle of about 7 or 8 kids. About 3 or 4 of them were current students and they were in their uniforms. But there were 3 or 4 who were alumni. And they were in this circle singing. Guess what they were singing? 3rd grade history song. They were singing all the songs that they knew growing up, and they were smiling, and from the elementary kids to college students. This kind of community starts to develop, and things happen among these kids who are educated this way that just, it wouldn't happen anywhere else. For example, I was with these girls, Zoe, when she was probably 6th grade, at a little cabin, and 5 or 6 of these girls were spending the weekend, and we were chaperoning and being with them, and they were around the campfire eating s'mores, roasting marshmallows. And I heard these girls talking, and one of them said, "S'more, what would that be in Latin?" And another girl said, "Well, it would obviously be feminine, so it would be s'mora." And then they declined it. S'mora, s'morai, s'morai, s'moram, s'morai, s'morai, s'moram, s'mari, s'mora, s'marish. And they went back to their conversation. These things happen that just make you chuckle. And then I remember Zoe, when she was in elementary school, the local Presbyterian pastor was at a cookout, and he was checking out the school, but he wasn't sending his kids there. And I could hear, I was about 5 or 6 yards away, and I hear this pastor starting to question my daughter. "Oh, so Zoe, are you studying the Bible?" "Oh yes, we are studying the Bible. In fact, I know all the books of the Bible. Do you?" "Well, I don't know." "Well, I know them all. You want to hear them? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua." It just goes singing her songs delightfully, because this had become just a part of who she was. And she was, of course, guileless about this. I remember 1st grade. We just moved into the building. I'm just telling good old boy stories right now. Who knows if this is related to the talk or not. I have full of stories, so I'll just tell you one more, and then I'll wrap up. So 1st grade. The 1st grade teacher was teaching in the building while we had an occupancy permit, but they were still putting the brick up on the 2nd floor. And so they had laid some plastic over the window to protect it, and then the scaffolding was coming up. And then the bricklayers and the workers were starting to put bricks on that 2nd floor where the 1st grade classroom was. So she had been teaching about the second coming of Christ all week. And on that Friday, the workmen get up to the 2nd floor. And the children begin to notice a man walking as if with a long beard. And one of the children notices and says, "Look, it's Jesus!" And another student says, "And he's smoking!" At which point the 1st grade teacher loses it and bursts out of the room. You will have these stories as these kids grow together and learn and love together. We are building the bridge back. The bridge we are building is like a rope swinging bridge, because we don't really know what we're doing. We're doing it the best we can. Now, she's 20 years ahead of me, right? Back when we were doing it, we were weaving rope together, trying to tie it across the river and get kids across. And we were learning as we were going. It's kind of precarious. We made a lot of mistakes. Not all the kids turned out really well. Some of the families got discouraged and left because of some of the mistakes we were making. Sometimes we just were reading books and trying to do the best we could by reading books, and then trial and error. But slowly we got better at it. So that's the generation that's building this rope bridge. But now the next generation, Zoe, and that that generation they're starting to rebuild the bridge. Just one other thing about Zoe. She studied English, and then she went and got a psychology degree, a master's at Villanova University. She had no business doing a psychology degree with not taking any psychology courses except Psychology 101. But she applied anyway. And Villanova said, I'm sorry, you don't meet our requirements. Well, can I tell you a little bit about myself? Before you know it, she had an interview, and before you know it, she was into the program. This is just what happens with these kids. They think they can do what they shouldn't be able to do, and then they go do it. And then she just sailed through and loved it. That generation is going to rebuild the bridge out of wood and widen it. And then the third generation will make it into a 2-lane highway going back and forth. Would you be willing to sign up for that? Could you be a part of this revolution that really is a restoration? If you do, you too, like me, will probably be exhausted at times, even while you're exhilarated all the way through. But it might be worth calling. This might not just be for your sons and daughters. It might be for you as well. As you bless them, you'll be blessed. Thank you very much.